Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your weekly fix of ancient warfare related question answering. Yes, you can ask a question however you can get hold of me. Yell in the street, send me a postcard. You can send us an email, murray@caravansaripublishers.com. You can comment on a previous video or podcast. You can, of course, back us on Patreon, and there's a forum to get messages through to us there, one of three different levels: Legionary, Optio, and Centurion. Now, this question comes from Kellen Elwood. I have a question. The Stanley Cup was just handed out last month. This is probably coming out sometime later than the question was asked. And players from both sides say it takes time. It takes them almost a year to feel normal again after 2 months of battling extremely hard. They play about 20 games during that span. Each player makes millions of dollars and has their own nutritionist hired. They eat well, and they're at the absolute peak of human fitness. How did Caesar's legionaries keep up that frenetic pace? Like, how did Caesar fight the Bibracte and the Arar in 58 BC? I know when a player who's been injured comes back to the end of the playoffs, he looks noticeably better than usual just because his body hasn't broken down and become exhausted. The strength and the determination of ancient peoples will never not fascinate me. Right. Thanks, Callum. Now, I did actually bring this up with someone accidentally when this question came through and said, the Stanley Cup, and they obviously their team had lost because their response when I mentioned the word Stanley Cup was highly negative. Anyway, yes, I think that what you've got is peak physical conditioning of ancient armies, that they are in incredibly good physical condition, and then they, mostly by forced marching, ask anyone who's been in the military, fitness in the army is generally brought about by forced marching with equipment, and then fake combats or military exercise, and of course running drills and things like that. So I believe that the ancient armies probably were all in peak physical condition. But like most wars, the actual amount of fighting being done is limited to days. And again, most of these battles that are being fought are single day affairs, and months between battles with recuperation, maintaining peak physical condition, and lots of marching to maintain and reattain any physical conditioning that might have been lost over winter, for instance. So in that sense, and the accounts we get tend to jump through all the boring bits. Even Caesar's account tells us, probably more than any other, march, 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 fight, battle, march, 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 fight, battle. And we tend to focus on the fighting of the battles. But in fact, the days of marching between those battles is where anyone who's suffered an injury is being sent to the hospital. Anyone who needs to be replaced is being cycled through a series of recruitment and reinforcement, so that when they come to fight, they're in peak physical condition. And they're not required to fight that often. And so I think that the focus that we put on the fighting is probably misjudged, that there's less fighting, more marching than there is the other way around. So yes, they need to be in peak physical condition. Yes, they need to fight for hours at a time when they are required to fight. But the actual amount of fighting is quite limited. And of course, it is what they've been trained for and what they've been conditioned for. You've got a really interesting, you bring up Caesar, and Caesar, as I say, is one of these sources who actually gives us the breakdown of the marching in a way that very few other sources do. Xenophon's Anabasis is another one which, they fight a battle and a couple of other small engagements, but most of their time to and from is spent marching. And again, when we look at most accounts of wars in the ancient world, they get past all of the boring bits first so that we actually get to the engagements. But in most cases, these are men marching on foot vast distances, so they're spending a lot of their time marching rather than fighting. You've also got, when you look at Alexander's conquests, he's marching that army from the coast of Ionia all the way to Afghanistan and India and beyond. That's a vast amount of marching. Anyone who falls by the wayside has the chance to recover. Anyone who's wounded can be recuperated, but you're generally going to be in peak physical condition for most of that time. And it's interesting, isn't it? We don't generally get stories of recuperation. We get stories of reinforcements arriving, and we do get stories of wounds. Like when we think of Alexander, wounded 7 times, we do get stories of his recuperation. And if we imagine that other soldiers are also similarly recuperating, that idea that they will come back refreshed and renewed is there, but we're not really given it specifically. And again, probably though, if you've been recuperating and your comrades have been marching and drilling, you're not going to be in the peak physical condition that they are. So, there's that idea also that if this is the lifestyle of a soldier on campaign, marching however far every day, and then drilling to make sure that you keep your discipline as when you go into combat, the idea that that is what you do, that's the lifestyle. The idea of peak fitness is kind of like, well, actually peak fitness is standard fitness. This is soldiers on campaign. This is where they're at. And so, in fact, coming back from recuperation, you're probably out of shape rather than in better shape. And so I think it's that. Yeah, it's tricky. I think, again, when you start to compare it to more modern wars, where actual combat is measured in days rather than weeks or months, and as wars have become more technologically advanced, you're more likely to see more combat in wars today than you were in World War II or other wars. But again, in our focuses on those, we concentrate on the combat, the 6 days a year you fought rather than the 359 days you didn't. So I think that's probably what it is, that these are men who are used to marching, used to drilling, and therefore when it comes to battle, it's putting all of that into action. Yes, they probably rest afterwards, because actually fighting a battle is probably more exhausting than just marching or just training for battle. But again, there's vast amounts of time between them. And we do occasionally get accounts of battles where an army is already exhausted and fights. But then you also have things like, the Athenian army after the Battle of Marathon march home, and they probably couldn't fight a battle when the Persian fleet appears in the Piraeus, but it looks like they could. And that brings up another question, which actually I'll answer in the next episode, about these meetings between armies. But that's for the next episode. So join me again for another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.